Welcome to this episode of the Residential College Summer Forum, organized by a creative team of staff and students here. I am Catherine Badgley, Director of the Residential College and faculty member in the Science, Technology, and Society program. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to mute my video so that you can hear me better. And I should also mention that there's a tempest going on right outside my window. So if you hear thunder and pounding rain, that's what's happening. I'm honored to introduce today's teach-in, Uprising Nation, about current and historical uprisings against racism, police violence, and Black protest movements in the United States. The national and global outrage over the brutal killing of George Floyd has unleashed anger, grief, and determination to declare enough violence and oppression against African Americans. As a society, we are long overdue to face up to and reckon with the legacies of colonialism, slavery, racism, and inequality that are part of the fabric of our society. Today's forum is one way in which the Residential College expresses its respect for Black lives and its commitment to improving human rights here and at large. Also, we support today's strike for Black lives and for shut down academia. Thank you to the administrative team of the Residential College, the Summer Forum Planning Committee, our presenters and moderators, all of you who helped spread the word, and those of you attending now. Our forum today has two presenters, Dr. Heather Ann Thompson, a current faculty member in the Residential College, and Dr. Harvey Slaughter, an alum from 1972. In addition, Dr. Stephen Ward, another current faculty member, and Camilla Lazundia, who graduated from the RC this past May, will moderate the program. I am pleased now to introduce Stephen Ward. Stephen is Associate Professor in the Residential College Social Theory and Practice program and in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies. He is Faculty Director of the Semester in Detroit program, which is based in the Residential College and is open to all undergraduate students. He's also a board member of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center in Detroit. And now, Stephen, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. And hello, everyone. And again, welcome. I will be helping to moderate today's program. And my co-host in doing that is Camilla Lazundia, as you heard, just recently graduated from U of M and from the RC. Camilla has been an active member of the RC. I'd like to bring Camilla now to present a statement from the organizing committee.
Hi, everyone. As Stephen said, my name is Camilla, and I'm one of the moderators of this event. Today marks the strike for Black Lives, which is being held in conjunction with the Shut Down STEM and Shut Down Academia initiative. On behalf of this event's planning committee, I want to acknowledge the strike's purpose, which is to give Black academics a break and to give others an opportunity to reflect on their own complicity in anti-Black racism in academia and their local and global communities. We stand in solidarity with this worldwide strike and intend that this event is in the spirit of the strike, contributes to the spirit of the Black Lives Matter movement, and does not cause harm. With that, I will hand it over to Stephen for some housekeeping announcements.
Thank you, Camilla. First, I'll lay out quickly the format of this event. I will introduce Heather Thompson. She'll then speak for about 15 minutes. Then Heather and I will have a couple of minutes of conversation. I'll respond to some things Heather said. Next, I'll introduce Harvey Slaughter. Harvey will speak for 15 minutes, and then I will have a few minutes of conversation with him. And then we will engage questions from all of the attendees. And the way the questions will work is we ask you to please, at any point during the program, to place your questions in the chat function. And as you do, please indicate to whom you are addressing the question, if it's to Harvey or to Heather or myself or to all three of us. Camilla will be monitoring the questions and then help to facilitate discussion of them in the last part of the program. The event will go until 5:30. And as Catherine has already referenced, we are anticipating some strong weather, so please bear with us in case the weather causes any interruptions with the program. But the plan is to go till 5:30. And please know the event is being recorded for future sharing in some electronic format, such as a podcast or a video file to be accessible on the RC website. Now, Uprising Nation, what it means and where it takes us. This rather large and bold title for our conversation today seems particularly appropriate because of the events of the last 2 weeks, but not just these events, but what they speak about our history and our future as people, as communities, as a nation, and a broader global nation, broader global world. So the title is offered as in a declarative statement. I'd like to invite us to think about it as framing two large questions. What this current moment means and where it takes us. And to see these as open questions, open in the sense that they're very big and difficult to answer, but also open in the sense that temporally they're evolving. So we can think about what this means right now and what the protests and all this taking place in the context, of course, of the pandemic, where it has taken us now, but also think about what it will mean in the future. Where will it take us? Next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now, 50 years from now. And our conversation today will help us to try to think about what it means and where it takes us and where it will take us. Again, we can't fully answer those, but we've tried to put together a program, a conversation where we can look back and learn about the history, historical precedents and context, as well as contemporary context to engage those questions. For instance, part of what we'll do today is go back 50 years from today. We're here on our campus, Black students mounted the Black Action Movement, which you'll hear about, in 1970. Another Black Action Movement took place in 1975, a third in 1987, which have been labeled BAM 2 and 3. So we will hear from Harvey about the Black Action Movement 1, or BAM 1. In 1970, in that year where students were shot down by National Guardsmen on the campuses of Jackson State and Kent State, where some of us listening witnessed those, were around at that time. In fact, that is part of their experience as college students, as people in the nation, who have that historical perspective, which they can share with those of us who weren't there. But that, of course, was the broader moment of the emergence of Black studies. The RC itself was just 3 years old at that time, and that BAM strike helped to create the current Department of Afro-American and African Studies at U of M, as well as the Trotter Multicultural Center, which were then, at that time, known as the Center for Afro-American and African Studies, and the William Monroe Trotter House. And they, of course, came a couple years after the protests across the nation, which we will hear about, after the assassination of Dr. King. Heather Thompson will guide us in thinking about what those protests were, those uprisings called riots by the mainstream and those who opposed them. Throughout the country after Dr. King's assassination in 1968, which of course followed 4 years of uprisings called so-called long hot summers from 1964 to 67. All of that is part of the context of that moment, which has direct connections to our moment. We can look back 5 years ago when Sandra Bland encountered a police officer in Waller County, Texas, which led to her death while in the custody of the police, which of course came a year after the deaths of Eric Garner and Mike Brown, and is the moment of the phrase Black Lives Matter and the coalitional movement for Black Lives, which very much were part of the moment then 5 years ago and are part of this moment today. So as we engage this conversation, I would like to offer us again, think about those two large questions. And then I want to close now with encouraging us to question some of the language that is used. And there are a few words I want to ask us to think about not using anymore without thinking about why we're using them. The first one is unarmed, as in the police killing of an unarmed Black person. It is, of course, true that George Floyd and all the others were unarmed, but I would like to think about why is that adjective, why is that circumstance always invoked? The next is nonviolent, as in I support nonviolent protests. Similarly, peaceful, as in the police treatment of peaceful protesters. Nonviolence has a particular meaning in the civil rights movement, both as a philosophy for Dr. King, but also as a tactic for the civil rights movement. So I'd ask us to think about, are we invoking, without thoughtfully doing so, that movement and the moral prerogatives in using nonviolence? Likewise with peaceful. And the last word I'd like us to think about in our conversation will very much be directed toward is the word justice. Justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for Ahmaud Arbery, justice for George Floyd. No justice, no peace. These are the slogans that we see and hear, and they are, of course, righteous. But I invite us to question what would justice really mean and look like in this moment. And of course, there are different types of justice. Some justice is punitive. Some justice is restorative. So I'm encouraging us to let this conversation help us think about these words and how those words connect to the actions that we all can do and want to see to engage in this broader struggle that we are living through. With that, I'll now introduce Heather, and then we'll hear from Heather. Heather Ann Thompson is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian on the faculty here at U of M and DAS in the residential college. She is the author of Blood in the Water, the Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and its legacy, as well as Who's Detroit? Politics, Labor, and Race in an Modern American City. She also writes regularly on the history of policing, mass incarceration, and the current criminal justice system for myriad scholarly publications, including the Journal of American History, the Journal of Urban History and Criminology and Public Policy, and other popular outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, The Atlantic, and Salon. Thompson has served on a National Academy of Sciences Blue Ribbon panel that studied the causes and consequences of mass incarceration in the United States, and has given congressional staff briefings on the subject. She currently serves on the Standing Committee of Law and Justice in the National Academy of Sciences. Heather?
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for those words of wisdom as we think through today's conversation. I'm so grateful to be here to share this conversation with all of you. As Stephen mentioned, I'm a historian, so I come to you as he does in that role, but also I come to you really as a committed ally. This question of justice is what brings us all here today. And what I'd love to do is have this conversation very much about where we go forward, but also about where we've been, which is why I'm so grateful Harvey's here, and also Stephen, because Stephen's work is so critical to this discussion as well. For me, I think what I'd like to do is to offer us some food for thought about this as a national question, and leave my colleagues to talk more about how this is really played out locally, particularly at U of M. I think in so many ways it's really important to realize that for reasons both horrifying and also reasons deeply inspiring, we've been here before. And let me explain what I mean by that. The horrifying part of it is that so much of what we see that motivates, scores and scores of people out into the streets today is so deeply familiar in this country. The extent to which racism is quite literally baked into the DNA of this country is, it's almost hard to kind of be able to convey that with words, and just the bodies alone, the death toll alone, the just sort of daily microaggression and macroaggression violence is kind of hard to catalog. But it is important we realize that it's baked into the DNA of this country, because it helps us to understand why the protests have happened before, what they've looked like, what they've meant, and where maybe we could do things differently this time. And that's the inspiring part. So while it's true that racial oppression is baked into the DNA of our country, and it's true that economic inequality is baked into the DNA of our country, and certainly it's true that using the police as a major mechanism to keep white power, white privilege intact, and the way in which criminalization and control is used to keep economic relations exactly as they are. That part's always been with us. And it's also true, though, that there's always been this deep history of resistance. And that resistance is daily. It is literally acts that human beings take every moment that they leave the house and every time they open their mouth. But then there are these moments that really touch a collective nerve. And we've certainly seen those throughout history, but I want to really talk about the 60s because that's the period that the media invokes so much as a comparison with this one. There is no question that all of the lynching and racial violence that went on throughout this country was not new in 1955. It wasn't new in 1965, but there were moments when a collective nerve was touched. That one of those moments was after the murder of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was not the first, not the last, not even remotely only one of the many people killed. But his death touched a nerve and really touched off a moment of collective resistance. The same thing was true after the assassination of Dr. King. And in those moments when a collective nerve was touched, there was extraordinary collective resistance. And I think that those are moments that we need to look at for lessons, both to inspire us, but also to really think on. Stephen pointed to some of these, the tactical questions, the theoretical questions, the philosophical questions about how one best organizes. Because one thing's for sure, we have a pretty pat narrative about that moment that I'd like to invite us to question a little bit. And that really is a sort of a narrative that, well, there's a couple of them. One of them is that thanks to all of that resistance, we got rid of racism in America. You know, we got the Civil Rights Act, we got the Voting Rights Act, and that's sort of a congratulatory narrative, but it's also one that's deeply naive, because what we realize looking back on it is that every one of those concessions, which indeed were forced and were indeed the product of collective action, never had the teeth, never had the enforcement, never had what they needed to have actually made any difference. And in fact, what we have seen is that they were very quickly eroded via the same mechanism of criminalization and confinement that had created the problem in the first place. So for example, we get the Voting Rights Act, but no sooner do we get the Voting Rights Act than we start a massive war on crime that then locks up Black and brown citizens at record numbers and completely disfranchises them, and then therefore undercuts the very victory of the Voting Rights Act. And so what we've seen, what we've learned is that state violence takes a lot of forms. Yes, it was the police in the streets in the 60s, but it was also the quiet violence of undoing the gains of the 60s. And probably worse, it was the violence of then telling people that the reason we got that backlash, the reason we got the war on crime, the reason why we get Nixon is because of the protests. In other words, it was the violence in the streets, quote unquote. This is another word that Stephen wants us to think about, peaceful versus violent. It was the violence in the street that led to the backlash. And I just want to invite us to rethink about that in the 60s, because I think it's an important question today too. We need to realize that the violence in the streets in the 1960s, the preponderance of the violence, from Chicago in 68 to Detroit in 67 to Philly in 64 to Rochester in 64 to Attica in 71, we could just go on and on and on, Orangeburg in 69, the preponderance of the violence was state violence. It was police violence. And we need to be really clear when we talk about violence, whose violence we're talking about. That's number one. Number two, this idea that protest spawns backlash. This idea that protest is the reason we get Nixon, it's the reason we get the war on crime, is just deeply ahistorical. What we need to realize is that Nixon was no more racist than all the presidents before him at some fundamental level. That the agenda of white supremacy had been laced through every policy in American history long before Nixon. And so in fact, what Nixon did was simply do what was already being done, what was already part of the DNA of this country. And when you think of it that way, then it's not backlash, it's the ever-present drumbeat of American history. And when you understand that, then you understand that the protest can't be blamed for the backlash. The backlash is ever present. And it means that protest is really the only way that that has ever been put in check. Maybe not efficiently yet, maybe not effectively yet, but it's the only way it's ever been put in check. And that leads us quickly to today, because I want to turn it over to everyone else. Here we are again. We've had another collective nerve touched. Not the first police killing, not the last police killing. God knows how many more police killings are going on right now as we speak. But the killing of George Floyd touched that collective nerve and has brought people out into the streets. And what we need to remember is that that protest should not be blamed for the violence in the street. Because again, if you wanted to have a peaceful resolution to these protests, the solution is actually to change what's going wrong. The solution is actually to rein in the police. The solution would be a structural overhaul of the system. The solution is not to bring in more police. And so far, in virtually every city, the solution, the response to protest has been to bring in more and more law enforcement. And so that's a key thing we need to think about. We need to think about what the impact of this might be on our next election. We need to be cautious not to blame the protests on any support that might go towards racial oppression, the forces of racial oppression, because that support was already there. The protest is what's putting it in check. And then the final thing I would say is that we need to really think, as Stephen suggested, about these tactical questions about what is informing this protest and how can we do it differently this time so that whatever the solutions are, they are not just surface solutions, or they are not solutions that could easily be undercut and undermined as many of the solutions of the 60s were. And I think what we've learned more than anything is that unless they are structural solutions, we will have 1968s and 2020s over and over and over again. And part of that is, thank God, because it means that there will always be a check placed on that level of white supremacy and that level of police violence. But it would be really amazing if we could finally start thinking strategically and manage to get some structural changes so that we didn't have to constantly have that collective nerve touched. And I just want to turn it over then. Not particularly organized, but I'm a little kind of emotional about it. But Stephen, let's chat.
Let's go. Thank you, Heather. So you and I both put some question marks after some of the words, the language. We language used in the 60s, used in that era, and also used today. I want to pivot from that to some of the new language that is emerging that reflects some of the goals of the protests, of the movement. And I think we should clarify that many people are protesting, right? And that reflects a range of motivations. It reflects anger, it reflects frustration, and it reflects a sense that fundamental change is needed. Mm-hmm. And some of the current debate now is around defunding the police. One of the demands that has been raised from protesters is to defund the police. Mm-hmm. And a corollary or next step for some of that is the abolition of police. Of course, police abolition, and that being connected to a broader goal of prison abolition. So I wonder, Heather, if you have any thoughts on or any guidance you would offer people of how to think about this call for defunding the police, what it means to you in this moment and or historically.
You know, I'm so glad that you really zeroed in on that, Stephen, because one of the limitations of the movements of the 60s, for all of the incredible bravery and activism and dedication that went into those movements, was a faith that the structures, at least a large, widespread faith, that the structures could reform themselves, that with just enough pushing legislatively or just enough pushing at the levers of power, that some of these fundamental inequalities could amend, could reform. And I think it is very significant that we are past that in a large part. I think that it's very significant that the discussion now is about actually rethinking the institution of the police and rethinking the institution of prisons. And what I want to say to that is that actually it's not as insane or crazy as some people would like to point out or would like to suggest that it is. And history actually shows us that. You know, the police as an institution are not, you know, it's a modern invention in so many respects. Prisons are a modern invention. And what we need to realize is that things that can be created can be uncreated, and not just for complete chaos and anarchy, but to start having to have really thoughtful discussions about what would it look like to in fact undergird public safety? What would it look like to in fact have people remedy wrongs, take responsibility when things went awry? And we quickly understand that we have a very good model already for this. What most of the sort of deeply conservative, wealthy, particularly wealthy white citizens who cannot imagine defunding the police and they can't imagine the abolition of prisons, I would invite them to really be a little more honest about the way they actually think about the criminal justice system. And here's the test. Notably, when their children fall afoul of the law or get in trouble or have drug addiction or caught speeding or any number of other things, the last people they want to call is the police. And the last place they want their children to go to is prison. And that's because they fundamentally know that that's not going to create public safety. It's not going to atone for any wrongs. And in fact, it will completely screw up their child's life. And so guess what they do? It's called restorative justice. They immediately want to know, how can my child make it right in some meaningful way? How can they, if they are addicted, get help? If they are angry, how can they get help? And so in fact, we already know how to do public safety right, and we know how to do restitution and wrongdoing right, but we just have to do it for everybody's children. And we have to do it in a collective way. And that imagination, I think, is amazing that that's now on the table.
So 2 additional words I would like to put on the stop saying list. And the other ones, they're not on the stop saying list. They're on the let's be careful with them. This is just the stop saying list. Are crime and drugs. And I'll say more why I'm saying that later if it comes up. Speaking of later, I want to remind people to please issue your questions. I see we have a few, and I misspoke earlier. I said put the questions in the chat function, but actually there's a Q&A function, right, Camilla? So they should, so please, a few of you have, but please place your questions in the Q&A function. And I see a couple there. Well, Camilla will be guiding us with those. So please put your questions in Q&A function, which we will, or tab, or whatever the correct language is. And then we will be addressing those. So Heather, I think we're going to return to some of what you said at the when we get to the broader Q&A discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for saying that about crime.
Okay, so 2
we
of us have said that. So that's an invitation for someone to ask, what are we saying about the problem with that word use, crime? Okay, I'm going to turn now to Harvey, unless there's any other final points you want to add. Not final point, but at this point, anything else you want to add, Heather, or wait until? Okay.
Let's open it up for sure. Thank you.
Okay. So again, there's plenty much more to say. Some questions I've addressed and invite others. Now, I'd like to introduce Harvey. Dr. Harvey T. Slaughter is a proud alumnus of the Residential College, class of 1972, where he double majored in English and history. In the RC, he founded and served as the director of the first peer counseling office for minority students at U of M, the Abang office. He then organized, led, and successfully implemented the Black Action Movement initiatives within the RC. Dr. Slaughter has over 30 years of experience in conflict resolution, change management, organizational transformation, and whole system change theory. He has developed and led change initiatives in education, healthcare, and the private sector. His credentials include an MPH in strategic planning, a PhD in higher education with a specialization in leadership and professional development, all from, yes, the University of Michigan. Harvey?
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me here to speak. And I would like for, when you gave me the invitation, I thought what would be the best way for me to, give you my input. And I thought that what I would do was just really give you my reflections. All of us have been transfixed by what has been happening in the nation. For myself, I've been thinking about the relationships between what happened in the first BAM action movement, Black Action Movement, and what we've been seeing in Minneapolis. So before I get started, let me just preface my statements by saying that, I'm familiar with the Minnesota. I lived there for 10 years. My kids graduated from high school from there, and I've had experiences, not so pleasant, with the Minneapolis police, and I'm familiar with the area where Mr. Floyd was killed. We spent many a Sunday afternoon there. The second thing is, it was already mentioned that when I was 7 years old, Emmett Till was killed. And that was like transformative event. And I can still remember sitting with my parents and a few of my brothers and sisters, and the pall that had like just fallen over the family. From 1957 right into the civil rights movement, and I'm a civil rights baby, this issue of violence and being on the streets has been an issue for people like myself, people of color. And my parents, particularly my father, who I give a lot of credit to, he had 6 boys, and he got them all through that period without a police shooting him. And the way to do that was to make you absolutely clear about where you were at and where you needed to be during a certain period of time, okay? So like I'm referencing this whole civil rights piece as well. With the BAM strike, I was a sophomore, and I was just walking down the hallway in RC when 2 seniors, juniors really, who were part of our, they were part of the leadership coalition from all of the schools with respect to BAM 1. There was a leadership coalition, and they gave me, they had brought back from that group this information about the BAM strike and the BAM demands. And so I was tapped as the spokesman. I didn't put them together, but I was the person who they saw as the one they wanted to put those, take those demands to the Representative Assembly, since I already had some connection with them. The other thing I mentioned really quickly and move on is that Archie Singham was the professor from the University of West Indies, who was living in the residence college, as a resident professor at that time. And I trained under Archie, taking his political science course 450, Changing Order in Political Societies. And Archie was a person who believed that violence was a legitimate tool for social change. And he also introduced me to Samuel P. Huntington's work in terms of Changing Order in Political Societies. So my point is that it may seem different, but there are many similarities between what has happened since 1957, what happened in Prague, what's happened in the first Black Action Movement, and what's happening now. And that's basically what I want to talk about, what I perceive as what I'm calling 4 stages of protest, and then I'll give you my reflections on how they link to Minneapolis and how they link to BAM. In the 4 stages of protest, I think you have, in the first stage, a precipitating event, and then you have something that I call the dissemination of the action, of the event, and then you have what I'm calling the public spontaneous response, and then you have something that that's where all the rubber meets the road, and that's like the response of the powers of that be. The precipitating event in BAM was the police physical and aggressive tactics against students during their protests on campus. What particularly set off the Black students, i.e. the Black males, were that they were particularly aggressive against Black women. The Black women became very irate and were upset that there weren't enough Black males around. And then they came and sought us out and held us accountable. I remember that as the precipitating event. And from that point, everybody was involved. You know, there was no more dissension among the group. Everybody was deeply involved, and we made sure that there was always enough males around whenever we were like doing that protesting out, you know, across the campus. Now, with the death of Floyd, it's obvious that the precipitating event was caught on film, and the way he was murdered and the way he died shocked, in my view, the consciousness of the nation, and I think that's some of what is driving this. In the like I said before, in the BAM strike, it was just the police and their violence, but in Minnesota, I think what really helped was the fact that people saw, regardless of color, they saw themselves in that situation, and they thought that that could happen to my brother, my sister, or anybody. And so that's where, you know, I think was a galvanizing factor. In the second stage, in the dissemination of the event, the event goes viral. And with BAM, when that event happened, it went viral by voice of mouth, by word of mouth. And the newspapers, predominantly the Daily. It was a big thing on campus. It couldn't be, everybody knew about it. Everybody was involved. That was the piece. The other thing was that in Minnesota, because it was filmed and then uploaded, that drove the people's interest. So it's different, but it's the same. My question, though, and that I raised on this, as I was thinking to myself, well, why? The Minnesota situation shocked the moral consciousness of the nation. I think that's what helped drive the spontaneous response into the streets. Most Americans are walking around thinking that they have a right to protest and that the police are public servants. You know, what they saw was this no right to protest, and that the police were not public servants. They saw it as an attack upon constitutional rights, and I think that's what drove it. The third stage is the public's response to it. And BAM, as soon as that happened, the university administration was caught off guard by how quickly students pretty much was able to shut the university down. And the university was shut down in 18 days. In my personal, I had a personal relationship with the leadership of the college at that time, so I knew I could talk to them. But also, what was different in RC was that the representative assembly actually had power. Students and faculty and administration all sat on that assembly. They governed the college, and everybody's vote was equal. So if I could get a student to vote for me, his vote carries as much weight as faculty. Since we were fairly highly regarded among the faculty in the college, I was able to convince faculty as well to join us. The people who weren't voting for us were the administration, like the dean, maybe the assistant dean and others. They were good guys, but they had their thing about order. But we were able to get the representative assembly to vote and to close the college. And we were able to convince the faculty to join us. We also was able to do something that I hadn't thought we would be able to do, but they actually came to me. And that was labor, AFMA union in particular, came to me and said that if you guys vote to strike, we will not cross your picket lines. So now we had labor, we had faculty, and we had students. That's something that hadn't quite been done before and certainly hadn't been done so quickly. At the time, University of Michigan had fantastic executive leadership, in my opinion. President Fleming was an outstanding administrator and a great educator, sensitive to these issues, but even he couldn't stop this. And before he knew it, the university was closed down, and we have begrudging respect for that. So that's what happened in the band strike. I think what was unique about the Minneapolis response is nobody thought that it would be both multi-generational and multi-ethnic, and that it would spread across the state, and that it would spread so quickly across the nation. I can categorically tell you, I mean, I love Minnesota, it's a great state, but it's perceived as being a liberal state, but actually it's quite laid back and conservative. The fact that this rocketed around outside the Twin Cities and people hit the streets in protest in support of what was happening in Minneapolis spoke volumes to me about how viral this thing was going to be. And I wasn't surprised when it spread to the rest of the nation, the way it spread across Minnesota. And I think it was very unique how quickly it spread to other cities around the world, including Europe, I think even in China. So so I'm thinking that is also what is unique about this, the speed at which, if something moves really fast, it doesn't give the powers that be a chance to respond in their normal way. During this particular period of time in 69 and 70, this really hadn't quite happened before, and so there was no standard way to approach it, and because of that, they hesitated, and when they hesitated, by the time they turned around, 18 days later, the place was closed down. I think the fourth stage, in my view, is that, which is I think is a problematical one, and that is like, what is going to be the response of the powers that be? Because you win or lose it, and there's also some schism that's there because you don't know which way it's going to go. In the case of, and frankly, I'll be honest with you, I fully expected us all to be thrown out of school and lose our scholarship. I had a 4-year scholarship. I had fought hard for it. I thought long and hard before I joined the BAM strike, but I couldn't in good conscience stay at Michigan if I couldn't get Michigan to agree to what I thought were the reasons why they had encouraged us to come. And the reasons why they said they were a great university. Great universities respond to this type of thing. And so I really expected that. So the real question was, what was going to be the university's response? In the BAM strike, what happened was the police escalated the violence. That caused further schism and conflict. Robin Fleming, the president, then went to the police and negotiated their exit off of campus. That gained him some begrudging respect and support among the students, once the police were taken out of it. And then that left the university in a ready position to enter into negotiation phase with the students. In Minneapolis, what happened was Mr. Floyd was killed unjustly, and then there's this long delay in arresting or charging the offending officers. That led to greater outrage and a continuing unrest. And then when they declared a curfew, the police came through the communities and fired bullets at people standing on their porch during a curfew. I'm telling you, I was in Detroit in '67. I've been in a curfew. I've seen the police come down the street. I was in the east side of Detroit, and we had the National Guard tanks coming down State Fair Street, the major avenue where I live. And but we also had situations like this going on with the police. Young ladies out beyond curfew. Federal soldiers roll up on her. Hey, young lady, what are you doing out here? What do you mean? You can't be out here at this time of night. It's curfew. Oh, it's curfew? It sure is, miss. You got to go home. Okay. That's what the feds did. And they de-escalated. They let the lady go home. There were no bullets fired. You know, there was no problem. We could stand on our porch. We could go into our yard. We just couldn't go out and about doing curfew. I saw the action of the police against the people in Minneapolis doing the curfew to be an escalation of violence, and it should be perceived that way. And that's offensive to most Americans. Curfews themselves are offensive to most Americans. Telling us where to be and where we can't go is offensive to most Americans. And so that didn't do them any good. And so I'm just saying that in this last response then what they did was, you have to respond quickly, and then you can tell what direction powers that be are going to go in. My fourth stage then is you move towards the negotiation piece. It's time to negotiate. This is the problem. In the BAM strike, this was not as difficult for us as it may be for the current situation. During the BAM strike, we had a committee comprised of predominantly, frankly, I can't remember everybody that was there, but I know that the law students were involved, the psych department was involved, the social work school was involved, and certain people from the from, I believe, the College of El-Sneed, there's another group. But this was the committee that was like meeting and coordinating between all the organizations. It was also the group that the president was negotiating with. This was also the group that came up with the demands, okay? Let me say this, and then I represented the type of person who would be driving the demands in each of the areas that was closed down, at the university. In 69 and 1970, RC was a big deal because we had the relationships where students could come and meet. RC was a big deal. And the fact that RC closed down, I think we were the second, or maybe third, but I think the second college that maybe closed down during the Black Action movement. And that led to a certain amount of impetus to the movement. Speed and agility is important in these things. And that's why I think we were able to be successful. But in terms of moving towards negotiation, what I'm trying to say is that we already had a group of leaders, and the question for us or for them was, well, what do you want? What are you actually complaining about, and what's going to make it better? Now, I don't know this for a fact, but the rumor is that the president was meeting with the leaders after hours and helping them lay out what would be reasonable demands that would be something that would lead to something from it. And really what happened was that, it's my understanding that the School of Medicine had already established a 10% minority enrollment prior to the BAM strike. And so what I think the strategy was to basically give back to the university what they had already agreed on in certain parts of their organization. So how could they say no to 10% diversity enrollment for the whole of the university when they had already agreed to 10% diversity enrollment in their medical school? And so they would be arguing against themselves in their own policies. And that's what gave strength to the bargaining position of the students during that time. And in terms of my personal reflection on that. So with respect to the national, at the national level, my personal opinion is, in terms of the negotiating position, if in fact on the front end, the police had some of them taken a knee and had shown that they were in sympathy with the protesters, they might have taken a lot of the steam out of the movement. I'm thinking about Lafayette Park. And in Lafayette Park, what they opted to do was to escalate the violence against the protesters, who generally have been presented and perceived as being pretty nonviolent and basically exercising First Amendment and Second Amendment rights. So it's that show of force, I believe, in Lafayette that really has hurt and their cause of those so-called law and order folks, and has driven up support, for the protesters. I have some other ideas in terms of reflections on violence, but I think I can bring those out to you with questions or with comments from Stephen.
Okay, all right. But let's make sure everyone heard that. So you said you have some additional ideas on thoughts of violence.
Violence, right.
So that may actually speak to the first question I want to ask you, which is not so much a question, but it's an observation and an invitation. So, but first, thank you for laying out your personal history as well as your reflections on that history and today, including your analytical framework of these 4 stages of protest. So here's the specific point I want to point out, which is you said that you studied under Professor Archie Singham, who was a very impactful political scientist, both in the Caribbean, in the US, in the field of political science. He actually is an important figure on the periphery in the history of CAS, or now DAS. But you say he lived in the RC, in the East Quad at that time when you were there. So I wanted to make sure all the students in particular take note that Harvey was remembering a professor he had 50 years ago and something that he learned from that professor, right? About Harvey, you said that Singham believed that there was political value or use of violence, right? And it's much more complicated than that, right? So I invite people to engage and other thinkers. One thinker from that period, Frantz Fanon, was well known for having written about that in the context of his engagement with the Algerian Revolution in the early 60s. So Fanon was part of the intellectual mix of which Archie Singham was also.
Right.
So
right.
I'm emphasizing this not just to say that yes, professors have some value, though I think that is the case, but in all seriousness, that speaks to part of what I was trying to raise in the beginning about we look 50 years ahead. So Harvey just did that. He gave us a sense of what 50 years after the BAM strike meant, after it took place, what it means now. So that's the point I want to raise. An invitation to you, Harvey, if there's anything you would want to share with students or ask students who are at U of M now and the RC now about how they are processing being in the RC, being in the U of M at this time of social upheaval.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned Fanon because I kind of skipped over that. I was deeply influenced by his first book, The Wretched of the Earth, and then the second one, Black Skin, White Mass, right? And he's from Martinique, and and you're absolutely correct about everything you said about him. But with respect to this idea about what are the effects of some of this, I think his work is some of the best work because particularly in Black Skin, White Mass, he actually shows you what's happening inside the heads and hearts of the people of color who are being denigrated by this force. And then he's actually showing you what was happening in the hearts and the heads of the colonizers who being, some of them as military people, were doing that during the day and then having all of these psychological and moral issues that was driving them to go see him as a psychiatrist, later on at night. It's not like damage isn't being done. Damage is being done in the streets. Damage is also being done to the hearts and minds and the psyche of people. And I think that that's important. With respect to Archie, one of the things about Archie was that he was just not just a professor there, but Archie would throw parties and invite all the students over his apartment. He would throw parties on campus, and everybody would be there, undergraduate, graduate students, etc. Archie said that one time I hadn't seen him for a while, and I saw him, and he came back, and he said, I said, Archie, where have you been, Professor, where have you been? And he says, there was some event that was happening worldwide. He jumped on a plane to go see it. And I said, well, why did you do that? And he said, because I don't really trust the newspapers. You've got to go to these places and observe and see it for yourself. And that's kind of like what I'm saying. This whole piece about with my daughter living in Europe has forced me to pretty much go to Europe every year. And it's quite different from when you're there and you are seeing and you are observing. There's no article, paper, or that's going to can give you the substance of that. And so so that's what I would say to students, like, if you can go, and when you experience, do it with both your head and your heart. That would be my
wonderful, wonderful. So Harvey's describing about his experience. You're describing your experience at U of M and in the RC in particular. I hope that all of us can use this as not just nostalgia or remembering for remembering's sake, but to do what I think history can do for us generally, which is to open up our thinking about the present and the future. So I'm hoping that RC students in particular, people associated with the RC, but other students broadly at U of M can hear Harvey's reflections and help that to animate your thinking about what would you like your experience at U of M to be, overall in general, and particularly in this moment, in this context. And here I will just mark, perhaps for some discussion later, or people can learn about later, but Camilla has been Camilla just graduated, but was and still is part of the RC community, part of an effort to think through and to extend, and reframe, recreate and reproduce a sense of community and overlapping communities in the RC. So I would like people to know that Camilla and others have been currently involved in that effort in the RC. For those who are not affiliated with the RC, the residential college, again, it was founded at U of M in 1967, and as a different type of educational experience, somewhat experimental, where the students have more of an active role in their educational experience. Harvey referenced that in the, he said the RC students have more power, and that was an important part of your experience and the role you were able to play. And it also reflects the culture of the RC is such where students don't call professors often call them by their first name. So for those who are not familiar with that culture, please know that when I refer to Harvey and Heather and Catherine by their first name, I'm not being disrespectful by not naming their titles as part of the RC's culture. Okay, so Harvey has said he has some other thoughts on violence. So even if no one puts that question in the Q&A, it's in my Q&A. So we're coming back to that. It's part of our mix now. I would like to turn it over to Camilla now and to see how we're doing with questions and let Camilla guide us with those. Thank
you, Stephen. I'm going to try to get through as many questions as possible, so I apologize for summarizing some people's questions, but thank you all for submitting them. And again, if you'd like to submit a question, you can click on the Q&A box or button. So the first question is directed at everyone on the panel. How do we respond to the harm without creating more harm and without relying on state systems such as the police and the criminal legal system? And further, how does one who wants to practice restorative justice focus on the needs of the people who are harmed, yet not lose sight of the harm doer's humanity when these people are so blatantly cruel?
Camilla, can I get you to repeat it, please? With at least the last part?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is talking about harm and violent protests. How does one who wants to practice restorative justice focus on the needs of the people who are harmed, yet not lose sight of the harm doer's humanity when these people are so blatantly cruel?
I'll take a shot at it. I don't know that there's a complete answer to the question, but I'm reminded of two examples. One happened, I read yesterday there was a protest over the death of Mr. Lloyd in Montana, and there's this gentleman who showed up, and you might have seen this video, and he was like swearing at people, in their faces, and including a priest walks up to him, and he was like, flicking the the F word and all of that. And like what the young lady did was she told the story about how her father had told her what to do if she was ever confronted by that. She was biracial, and so what she did was she took off her sunglasses, and when he was in her face, she met him with her eyes. Now she says that diffused it, and she could see that he was afraid, and from that point on, they moved. He was able to. They moved him away, police, etc. So that's one example. I'm reminded of the example of Mahatma Gandhi when the rioting broke out between the Muslims, and the forget the name of the other major group that makes up India, and so he went on a hunger strike and was dying on his bed. You probably saw this in the Gandhi movie, his history, and so the whole nation went into mourning because he was pretty close to death. And so he was on the bed, and this guy comes in with a piece of bread in his hand, and he throws it on him, and he says, "Eat. I can't have your death on my conscience." And so Gandhi, weak, says, "What have you done, my son?" And he says, what had happened was this gentleman had come home, and they had killed his 8 or 9-year-old son. So he rushed into the street and did the same thing to the first 8 or 9-year-old son, a boy that he met. And so he says, "I know I'm going to hell for that, and but I don't want your conscience. I want your death on my conscience as well. Eat." And Gandhi's told him, "I know way out of hell." And he looked at him and he says, "What?" And he says, "What you do is you go into the world, and you find an 8 or 9-year-old who's been made homeless, and you raise him as your own son." And I'm thinking that this sounds kind of hokey, but the passion of the people. I mean, I looked at the face of Chauvin with his knee on the gentleman's neck, and I couldn't see the humanity. I assume it's there, but I couldn't see it. So I'm assuming it's there. And we can only hope that somehow we can tap it. That's all thing I got on that.
I want to jump in too, and thank you so much for that, Harvey. I think that's really the key, which is there's no way forward without proceeding fundamentally with the principles of humanity, and that is the core. That is the core to justice. There can be no justice. There's the phrase "no justice, no peace." But I think the other powerful phrase is there is no justice without humanity, and you have to humanize, whether it is someone who is harmed or someone who has committed harm. The key is that they're all human beings, and that fundamental premise is what we've lost in our criminal justice system, and it's lost in a nation where where racial inequality is so structurally baked into the system. Whites have never been forced and are not forced just inherently to see the humanity of anyone other than themselves. So the humanity is the key to it. And I would just say to that questioner that the good news is there really is some good news here, which is that there is a lot of work that's been done on restorative justice, a lot of really profound and powerful work that we have great historical examples, but we also have, there's all kinds of people who really do specialize in this, and not just in the schoolyard and not just in community settings, but actually in situations of murder and situations of sexual assault. And so we actually have a really rich and deep practice and knowledge base about how restorative justice can work. And I think that in terms of relying on state structures that themselves create harm, that is a real problem. And certainly people's impulses to always call the police first when there is harm, in all communities' impulse to do that is one that has to be discouraged, because in fact, we know historically, we know experientially, and we know just moment by moment that never makes things better. Justice doesn't come from that, and remedy and restitution never come from policing. And so we have to think about other structures to do that. And the good news is a lot of people are thinking about that. And I think we should think in the RC, maybe there is a way we can think about, I use it in my class, but we can certainly offer as a resource. There is a really thick restorative justice reading list, some of it webinars, and just really, really great stuff. So I want to just encourage people to, it's not just theoretical. There's really good stuff that can be done.
Can I say something else really quickly?
Sure.
Well, not to go biblical, but, Moses was a murderer, and St. Paul was a multiple murderer of all the Christians that he killed before, when he was Saul and before he became Paul. And we all know about the movie Schindler's List, who was a willing participant with Hitler in his work, but then went on to do a lot of work behind the scenes in saving Jews. We cannot give up on the ability of people to transform themselves. If we give up on that, we almost will have to give up on the American ideal. We all have the capacity at any given point in time to change and to be different than what we were yesterday. And you have people who go both ways. Some people will turn from the good to the bad. Others will all of a sudden transform themselves and be for their quote good. So, but it's there, and we need to always be able to work towards it. And if you're working with children in particular, Piaget and all that type of thing, you can kind of see that more in smaller kids than we might be able to see it in ourselves and as when we become teens and adults. But it's there.
Thank you, Harvey. I'm going to turn over this next question to Heather. I'm getting a lot of questions from student organizers or students who are interested in organizing in their community. So for Heather, how can we put pressure on the university now to fully divest from the Ann Arbor PD, or at least disarm and demilitarize campus PD?
That's a great question. Like all campaigns, like all social movement campaigns, there has to be organization and there has to be kind of relentless pressure. And certainly the most successful campaigns at Michigan have always been ones that link up with community organizations, not just the students, but students in concert with community orgs. One of the things that we're really hard at work on, it's not specifically about the police, but it would be a very logical offshoot of it, is that we are working still really hard to get the university to step away and abolish its policy on criminal background checks and on requiring people to disclose if they've been arrested. Making sure that everyone can apply to the University of Michigan without checking a box as to whether or not they've ever been convicted of a crime. And so, I think that there's a lot of work going on already, and I think it would be absolutely logical. There's a lot, RC students are at the front and center of that work, and I think it'd be amazing to start adding to the work on criminal background checks, this work on the Ann Arbor police working with the Michigan police, because that relationship has never fully been interrogated. We have a police oversight board at Michigan, faculty members sit on it, but the fundamental question as to why is there this relationship, and why are they the same people? I mean, they're literally the same people who go back and forth between the Ann Arbor police and the University of Michigan police. That's the discussion we should be having, and this is the time to have it. And the good news is there's a structure already where we can start having that conversation. So offline, I'm happy to talk with anyone about how to connect on that.
Well, I can say that life on campus is quite different when you have a police force that's unarmed. And and when I was at Michigan, the police were de-armed, and they didn't have this aggressive approach with students. And it's a different type of environment. And then I was actually kind of shocked when they started to carry weapons, and then they began to have a greater presence on campus, and it was a different type of environment. So I think this is a critical question. I'm glad you raised those issues. I didn't know what you just shared, but like if we could get back to the old way, it would be great.
Thank you, everyone. I'm getting a few questions going back to the discussion of why not to use the words crime and drugs. Could either Stephen or Heather elaborate on this?
Okay, well, I'll start. And let me clarify. I'm not trying to police anyone's speech, not by any means. I was trying to encourage critical engagement with and challenge to the ways that some of these words are used. So the first set of words I reference are in the discussions of the current uprisings: unarmed, nonviolent, peaceful, and justice. And I'm not against any of those words. I'm just saying I think there's a moral economy. There's a set of moral assumptions that are unarticulated, but are very much infused with the use of those words. And if we interrogate that and challenge it in some articulations, then I think that can help us get more to the core of what we're describing, challenge and confront those who are misrepresenting it, and open up space to get to more fundamental transformation. Now, for the words of crime and drugs, I'm putting those in a bit of a different category. And I say justice was in its own category. Justice, I'm saying, moving towards restorative justice and so forth. Crime and drugs, I'm putting in a different category. Part of a broader conversation that preceded and intersects with, but not part of the current moment so much, not specifically. Which is to say that, but they both also have this set of moral assumptions that are built into them. And they get used, and they are terribly imprecise.
Sorry, is that me? So sorry.
Oh no. So they are so broad and terribly imprecise, but that imprecision is not recognized, and so they do a lot of harm. For instance, what are drugs? When we were young, when I was young, when all of us are young, we learned about a place called a drugstore. There's some good things that are there, right? But then we also learned about this drugs that are harmful and terrible. And there are bad people who use drugs. And in the criminal justice context, certain drugs are described, but marijuana, of course, is very different from other drugs. But that labeling of drugs collapses them all, uses the moral framework to castigate some, and doesn't open up space to think about the better responses to see drugs as a matter of health, of public health, right, of addiction and so forth. But that way that drugs in the aggregate is used is way to reinforce criminal justice responses. And crime has a similar context. Technically, crime just means something that is outside of the law, right? An infringement, a transgression of a law. And it comes with its own moral authority, but it is amoral. It has nothing to do with morals. It's a set of legal codes that then get mapped onto moral. But people break the law all the time, so for some reasons which are morally very justified, right? So that's one reason why the use of crime is misleading. Another is that certain crimes are in our mind when we use crime, but other crimes, white-collar crimes, crimes of various spaces where people aren't highly policed, don't get recognized. But law enforcement, politicians, and others use crime rates and so forth for all these really nefarious measures and outcomes. So that's the summary of why I'm saying we should be really careful and just challenge the use of those words. So qualify them, disaggregate them, and get more to the heart of what we're trying to describe.
I would totally agree with what Stephen said. And I would just add to it that, I mean, in addition to the to it being problematic to use the word crime, because it implies that it is something that is static and has a life that has meaning on its own, when in fact we know that it does not. We know it is completely socially constructed. What is a crime in one moment is not a crime in another. What is a crime for one person is not a crime for another. But it also is important to really interrogate that language, because it takes our attention away from what our community goal is. Our community goal is not to police crime, it is to encourage public safety. Our community goal is not to police drugs, it is to help mitigate addiction and the trauma associated with addiction. And by focusing on words like crime and drugs, we are automatically embracing the punitive approach to those issues and assuming that there is a dispassionate logic to it, when in fact what people are interested in is not the crime. You know, it is the safety, it is the harm, it is the remedy, it is the restorative, it is the recovery. And when we start using words like that, it really does mean that you don't call the police. You call the police if a crime is committed, but if you really want to make a situation better or have someone take responsibility or to somehow remedy the harm, the police are useless to that, because the only thing they can do is arrest somebody. They can't do any harm reduction. They can simply arrest somebody. So by just shifting the language, our actual mechanism when things happen changes too, I think.
Absolutely. And also it's adequately that crime and drugs both have a set of racial ascriptions and presumptions that are baked into them.
And also, I would say violence, the word violent is also being used that way. For example, when the president looked at what was going on in Minneapolis, he's quick to call that violent, but he didn't see what he did in Lafayette Park as being violent, you know? So it's like, the question becomes, whose violence? Violence was useful for him in Lafayette Park, but not useful to the protesters, you know, in Minneapolis. And so I would put that word in there as well. We have to be very careful about who's being violent and who's not being violent. You know, we also saw that in the video that came up in the Rambo. You know, when the lady called the police because he asked her to put her dog on a chain, and she said, this person, this black man, it's like, you know, oh my, you know, and she implied that she was in a violent situation. And so the word violent and then person of color, you know, gets linked.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there you go.
Can I also just say, just in case anyone doubts the power of that or the power of those words, even beyond the individual circumstances in which they operate, it is remarkable. I have talked to so many reporters this week, and they constantly ask the same question, which is, well, how do we understand the violence when these protests turn violent? Is it like what happened in 1968? And what they want me to say is that somehow that was the downside of 1968, or that was, you know, that's where things went wrong in 1968, or that's where sometimes something went wrong at the end of the 60s with the civil rights movement. And the reason why that is so interesting to me is because somehow we have written the history of the 60s, the collective history of the 60s, the 60s history that the lay public knows and that reporters know, as it was all fine till the movement turned violent.
Right.
And what is extraordinary about that as a historian, the work that we all do, it's just, I mean, it's really kind of extraordinary. The preponderance of the violence in the 1960s was categorically, unequivocally state violence. That is to say, in every major event you can point to, all of those iconic events, again, from Orangeburg to Greensboro to Attica to Detroit, the preponderance of the violence was police violence. And yet somehow we now have reporters talking about 1960s as if that's when things went off the rails because of protester violence. So owning that language matters.
Right.
It matters a lot in how we understand the moment we're in.
Understand as well that there would be no American Revolution if there hadn't been violence of the Patriots in Boston. And you only have to look a little bit to see all of the property that they damaged in that process. And so but that's great because it led to our freedom. But it's not great in these other areas, according to the powers that be.
Thank you, everyone. To conclude this discussion, I'm going to pose one more final question to everybody on the panel. What do you think is the biggest barrier to white Americans in getting behind police and/or prison abolition?
I'll answer quickly and say, I don't know. White Americans, they need to speak to that.
Well, can I just say that to me, the biggest barrier is that nobody's telling the truth. Nobody ever tells the truth about the system, about the way that they benefit from the system, about the system that they actually wouldn't put their children into, about the reality of it is not telling the truth, which is why, to me, some of the most important and vital work that white allies can do. Yeah, it's absolutely, join the march, get out, be an ally in every way. But the hardest discussions, the most kind of central work that can be done is at the dining room tables and at the Thanksgiving meals and at the, sitting around the couches of fellow white family members, because the message in those spaces is really clear. Tell the truth. Tell the truth about why it is that you wouldn't send your child to prison. Why wouldn't you call the police when Junior is, stole your credit cards? Why wouldn't you? And if you tell the truth, then we can start getting at this question of really owning the privilege. Really, and those discussions all have to take place among white people, and that's not the burden of people of color to take up that fight. I mean, that's just my hobby horse on that.
And you're absolutely correct. And I would add, follow the money. The prison system is a system that is financially benefiting a lot of people. And if we follow the money, we can get at some of the resistance to breaking that system down, particularly with respect to the privatization of prisons.
Well, thank you, everyone. To wrap this up, I want to express how thankful I am to see such a great turnout at this event. Thank you, Heather and Harvey, for their time and contribution, and thank you, Stephen, for guiding the conversation. Thank you also to the Residential College, Catherine Badgley, and to those who helped plan this event. And I'll turn it over to Stephen for some last words.
So I also issue thank yous to everyone, both on the screen and all those who have been listening, who submitted your questions, and apologies for those whose questions didn't get addressed. But I think that there will be some follow-up from the organizers, from the forum committee. So please do look for that. And I hope that we all can take something from this and see how the words we've shared and discussed can point to the actions that we can take as we all think about what the struggle means now, what it will mean in the future, and how we can play our role to bring about the transformations that we all know must come.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for including me in this. And if anyone still listening has follow-up for any of us, I know that we're happy to keep this conversation going, because it's going to be a while.
Yes.
We're going to still be talking about this. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.